Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I hope everyone is doing well. We here at LAPL like to be nice and generous, so let's just take a few minutes for people to show up. It is 7 o'clock right on the dot, so let's just give people one moment. I hope you're all doing well. Um, Great response from everyone as far as getting RSVPs to this. People are thinking about De La Soul, which is no surprise. So I'm glad that we get to celebrate them with you all. As we're getting ready, I just wanted to plug a few events that we have going on at Los Angeles Public Library. On Saturday, this Saturday, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Central Library, we've got Independent Voices. That is a celebration of authors and zines. It is a day of panel discussions, workshops, and other activities celebrating the written word, self-expression, and DIY culture. So zines, self-publishing, research for writers, very cool annual event with sessions in both English and Spanish. You can go to lapl.org/indie, INDIE, for more info. And another one that I wanted to plug, this is a bit further in the future, but it's going to reach capacity for sure. It is on Saturday, December 6th, from 2 to 4:30 p.m. at Central Library's Makerspace, the Octavia Lab. Maybe you've heard of it. It's amazing. There's going to be Return to Earthseed, a tabletop roleplay campaign in Octavia E. Butler's Parable universe. This is a homebrew RPG role-playing game based on Butler's Parable series. It is open to teens and adults, from experienced gamers to absolute beginners. All are invited. All you need to do to RSVP is send an email to RSVP octavialab@lapl.org. That's going to fill up for sure. So check your planner and give them an email if you're interested. Let's see. So my name is Chris Taylor. I am the music librarian at the Art, Music, and Recreation Department in Los Angeles Public Library's Central Library. I'm responsible for our books on music, both print and electronic, as well as our huge collection of sheet music. And I also have the privilege of putting on events like these, both in person and online. So for this event today, I'm going to give our guests a quick intro and then let them chat about High and Rising and De La Soul and really whatever they'd like. And then we'll take 10 minutes or so at the end for audience questions. We do have to take off at 8 p.m. They're going to close Central Library at that time. So can't wait to talk to them. And the chat is open, but please hold any questions until the end. And quickly about the book, let's get that on the screen. Yes. High and Rising, a book about De La Soul, is an extensively researched biography of one of the great hip-hop groups. And while the book is named after De La Soul's stunning, sample-delic 1989 debut, 3 Feet High and Rising, the book covers their entire career and all of its reinventions, frustrations, and glories. And despite the untimely passing of one of their MCs, Dave, aka Chugroy, this Friday will bring us their ninth album, Cabin in the Sky, so it's the perfect time to get together and celebrate De La Soul. We are, of course, joined by the book's author, Marcus J. Moore. You can find his writing all over the place: The Nation, NPR, The Washington Post, tons and tons of other spots. He champions jazz for the New York Times with his 5 Minutes That Will Make You Love series and celebrates classics and future classics for Bandcamp Daily. He's also the author of the esteemed 2020 biography, The Butterfly Effect: How Kendrick Lamar Ignited the Soul of Black America. And interviewing him will be Oliver Wang, author of 2003's classic Material, 2015 Legions of Boom, and the fresh off of the Angel City Press book, Cruising J-Town, Japanese Car Culture in Los Angeles. An incredible book. I'm so pleased to have them both here. The floor is yours, Marcus and Oliver.
Thank you. Marcus, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? You good?
You know, it would make sense maybe to hold this off to the end just from a chronological point of view, but actually, when we were putting this together, yourself, myself, and Chris, we didn't realize that De La was going to put out a new album like in 2 days. So have you heard any of the music off this upcoming LP, Cabin in the Sky?
No, I haven't heard anything. And it's probably my own fault because I have my next book deadline is in January. So You know that world very well.
Oh, yes. I get it. I get
You
it.
can't really listen to anything or take anything in until you finish the project. So I think that's where I'm at currently.
All right. Well, at some future point, we'll need to talk about Cabin in the Sky and see how it fits into sort of their overall catalog. But from their most recent upcoming release, why don't we start by taking things really all the way back? And I thought we could start off by talking about our respective introductions to De La, because I do think in with many musical artists that are important in general, I do think there is something about we have these distinctive memories about how we first encounter certain kinds of groups or albums. And I think with De La, in both of our cases, this is absolutely true. I've had the opportunity to share this story with folks before, but for me, my journey into De La land really begins here in Los Angeles, growing up here as a teenager in the 1980s. And I owe a lot of that credit to K Rock. And those of you who are from LA know K Rock as the modern rock FM station here in LA and has been for decades. But K Rock back in circa 1989 was programming De La Soul songs because, and as I'm sure we'll probably get into, De La was marketed as an alternative hip hop group at the time. And because K Rock was playing alternative music, they put De La Soul songs into their playlist. And so before I ever heard Me, Myself, and I, even though that was the big single off of 3 Feet High and Rising, K Rock would play Three is the Magic Number. And I was so intrigued by that that I went out to Moby Disc, which was a record store in East Pasadena, no longer here. Shout out to anyone who ever went to Moby Disc, and picked up a copy of 3 Feet High and Rising. And without exaggeration, people talk about how certain albums changed their lives. Well, this album changed my life because 3 Feet High is what got me into hip hop, and getting me into hip hop as a music, as a culture, as a community of people, etc., fundamentally shaped who I am. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if not for that album. And we'll certainly, you and I will get into what makes the group so significant, but I would love to know, what was your introduction to the group? And I know you're younger than me, probably substantially younger than me. So I'm guessing it probably wasn't 3 Feet High unless you were really precocious as a kid.
Well, no, I was very precocious as a kid. So I've been a unabashed music nerd since I was about 5 years old. So I remember the Potholes in My Lawn video. I remember hearing Plug Tune, and obviously I was a child, but I was definitely an MTV kid. The running joke with my cousins was always, you could just sit me in front of the TV and you wouldn't hear anything from me all day. Like we're talking early to mid '80s. So I can't remember exactly when or how I stumbled upon 3 Feet High and Rising. I think I was just looking at music videos one day. And I remember the Potholes in My Lawn video. And I remember how the beat just sort of stumbled out of the speaker. Like it didn't sound like anything that I had heard on the radio or anything else I'd seen on television. It was just like, it felt different in a really cool and interesting way, and it felt attainable in an interesting way. Meaning, obviously, hip hop at that time was very hyper masculine. I felt like everybody used the same drums, the same samples everywhere. And the thing I appreciated about Potholes in My Lawn in particular, and 3 Feet High and Rising in particular, is that even as a kid, I could tell that it was just different. It kind of reminded me of like jazz in that way, where they're pulling from all these different elements and they're funneling their sound into one thing. And yeah, I remember, I guess that was 1989. And I was 8 years old. And I remember watching this video. It looked like it was shot with a camcorder. I remember the Me, Myself, and I video. And I just was like, it just looked crazy. Their hairstyles were wild. Their outfits didn't even look like they matched or anything. And I just remember looking at that and being taken by the difference that they were putting forth. So I think that was my introduction, even as a
Yeah.
child. Yeah.
Yeah, this actually leads into what I was going to ask next, which is that there is, I think, a conventional wisdom about De La Soul. And by saying that, I'm not suggesting that it's wrong at all. But the conventional wisdom is part of what made De La Soul so important, especially in this moment that we're talking about in the late 1980s, is that they really fundamentally reshaped what we imagined hip hop could sound and be like. And so, to your point, right, this was the era of the larger than life, the superhero MCs, your, KRS Ones, your Chuck D's, your Big Daddy Kane's, your LL Cool J's, and so forth, and which was all great. But what De La suggested, and this is, I think, reflected in Marcus, your observation of them being accessible, is that they demonstrated that you could also be, as a rapper, you could be nebbish, you could be nerdy, right? You could be, very clever and funny, in addition to those other things as well. And I think it's really telling how, when you talk to a whole generation of hip hop artists who grew up listening to De La, is how so many of them point to that group as basically broadening their sense of possibility of what was possible, that there was room for people like, I mean, I think in particular of like people like Mos Def and Talib Kweli, as they, you can see and hear the influence, but, specifically they cite De La as the group in which, oh, wow, if they can do what they're doing, that means there's space in this for people like us too. So
Right.
again, that's the conventional wisdom. And as someone who both as a listener, but obviously also wrote about the group, how true do you think this is in terms of, was De La this kind of transformative set of artists in reshaping our imagination of what rap music could look and sound like?
I think absolutely, and the thing that I always want to make sure I do is I want to give proper credit as well to the Jungle Brothers,
Yeah.
because as much as, my generation, your generation, we uphold De La Soul, and we also uphold Tribe Called Quest for the same reasons. And like you mentioned, Black Star for that reason. I also feel like De La Soul doesn't become De La Soul without the Jungle Brothers. I feel like they were the godfathers of it. They were the ones that kind of paved the way for De La to do what they do. But to your point, when you're talking about the late 90s or the late 80s, and you have LL Cool J, you have Rakim, you have KRS-One and Boogie Down Productions, you have NWA that's just starting to ramp up. And so obviously everybody was different, their creativity was different, but their just sort of the masculinity behind it was the same. And I say that word carefully because that's not to suggest that De La Soul's music wasn't masculine. They just showed that you can be a different sort of way,
Right.
And I realized early that I was never going to be a Cool G rap. I was never going to be a Big Daddy Kane type. I was always going to be the sort of left of center kid who could appreciate NWA, but could also appreciate De La, whose cousin had a skateboard, whose grandmother played gospel music and whose mom loved Elton John, so that was sort of my upbringing anyway, before De La. And then when De La comes around, they just sort of put a sound to everything I'd been listening to in one place. So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that sort of brought me to the group as well. It's like, all these disparate sounds that I had been pulling from, be it the gospel or funk or whatever, it was all in one record. And so that can it made it a little bit intimidating, at least for me, because it's like, here are all my sounds, all my favorite sounds in one place.
Yeah.
Here's this cover that looks wild, but at the same time, it's showing us that we can be a different kind of way. It's showing us that, yeah, you can be quote unquote down or whatever, but you can still also go to class and be a nerd, and you don't have to be one way. You don't have to approach music or approach life or approach Black masculinity in the same way that everybody else does. And so I think De La was definitely the architects of that. And I feel like a lot of people are still pulling from that, to be honest.
Sure. Absolutely. You also mentioned, I think you've said this, you write this in the book, and you've mentioned it in other conversations and interviews, that part of De La's appeal too is that folks like Dave Trugoy and Pasta News and Mace, et cetera, reminded you of like your older cousins and the other older kids that you grew up around. And so, oftentimes I think when we look at the musical artists that we respect or in awe of, we create this separation between they exist in some plane of existence that we don't really relate to. But for you, it's very different, where you could see this relationship between their sensibilities and the people that you grew up around. So do you mind just talking a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, in particular, when you mentioned my older cousins, in particular, two cousins, my cousin Eric, who was a DJ, who spent a lot of time in LA actually in the 80s. And my cousin Isaac, who was again like this quintessential, growing up in the Washington, D.C. area, but was a nerd. He was a nerdy kid, but he was never given the opportunity to fully express himself, I don't think, in that way until a group like De La came around. But I was like wholly influenced by everything that my cousins were doing, my cousin Eric in particular would bring like, EPMD records. He was the one that told us that MC Hammer was going to be a thing. He's predicting all of this stuff before it happens. And I give him a lot of credit because he was never precious about his music. Like, obviously he was a DJ and the records were his, they were his livelihood, but he never kept me away from him. He never told me like, no, don't play these records, so I always give him a ton of credit. That's why I wanted to make sure that I reserve space for him in the book, because he, sadly, I probably didn't realize it fully until he passed, but he helped shape my musical output in a really, really major way. Him and my aunt Pam, I think. But yeah, our upbringing was very much like we're growing up in the DC area in the 80s. And at that time, DC was like the epicenter for the crack cocaine epidemic. So, and we grew up in a part of Maryland. We grew up in Prince George's County, in Landover in particular, where DC was right there. It was right, like you go down the street and you're seeing everything. So we're getting all the stuff that's happening in DC. The only difference was we had a yard. That was it. So, yeah, I feel like when I think about De La Soul in particular, when I think about Tribe, when I think about Jungle Brothers, just the Native Tongues movement in general, I think of my cousins, Ike and Eric in particular, because they're the ones who also, they could play NWA, they could play Too Short records, but then they're also going to play Tribe and they're going to play De La. And that's what sort of shaped the upbringing that made its way into this book, I think.
So speaking of that, right, and I know you fielded this question quite a bit, but it needs to be asked here. At what point did you really feel like I want to write a book about this group, and what was motivating that interest? Because obviously there's a lot of groups out there that you could devote the amount of time and effort into a book around.
Right.
You've done it for Kendrick, you've done it for De La. When and why did you decide, okay, I want this to be something to work on?
Well, I always appreciate that question, man, because I always like answering it. And I just feel like in my heart of hearts, I'm always going to be a music journalist, even as I drift away from it and I start writing more archival essays and I start doing other things around the practice, around creative writing. To a certain extent, man, I feel like music journalism kind of lost the plot a little bit, meaning I just don't understand why we would be writing about the same people over and over again. I don't feel like that's doing anybody a service if we're just presenting the same narratives or different aspects of the same people over and over. And I say that to say, when you go to the bookstore, you can see Bruce Springsteen represented. You see the Beatles represented. You see, I don't know, you see Miles Davis, you see John Coltrane,
Bob Dylan.
How many books does Bob Dylan have? So you see all of that. Whereas I'm always gonna come from the other side where, Kendrick, obviously, arguably the greatest rapper of his generation. He doesn't need me to write a narrative about him, but he's not represented in the literary space. Same thing with De La Soul, where it's just like, I feel like we've reached a point now where we need to be writing about our legends. I feel like De La Soul, they're legends to people like you and me, and Kendrick Lamar is a legend to a certain generation. And I feel like these are stories that need to be documented in the literary space. I feel like, and I'm not comparing myself to him at all, but I always appreciated how Amiri Baraka, Leroy Jones and Amiri Baraka would be writing about these artists as they were coming up. So his book Black Music is about, he has like stories about Ornette Coleman and Coltrane and Sun Ra, etc., as they're still doing the thing.
Right.
So that's what I want to do. I never want to wait until our legends are either old or transition before
Yeah.
we give them the flowers that they deserve. So, you know, even with Kendrick, I mean, there were obviously the love has outweighed the negativity, but there was definitely some like, oh, it's too soon. And I'm like, no, it's not soon. Like,
Yeah.
come on. It's not. We need to be celebrating these people. Same thing with De La. Obviously, I missed the boat with that one because Dave transitioned, unfortunately. But I still wanted to celebrate this group as best as I could from a journalistic lens while they were still doing the thing.
You've written two books now, notable books about important hip hop artists. But to your point, right, Marcus, you walk into your average bookstore and it is hard to find those books in the musical biography section compared to a lot of the other artists that you mentioned. You know, as we learned, 2 years ago, whether you agree with the historical timeline about this, we've had hip hop in our lives for 50 years now. And you would think in that time, there would be more of those biographies and memoirs and all those things, but they're still really uncommon, all said.
Yeah.
And especially as an author twice over, writing these kinds of books, what is it in terms of the publish industry? Do they not think that there's a market for this? I mean, the easy answer is racism, but beyond just that, like, what is it? Why doesn't the publishing industry think that as popular as hip hop is, that there would be a market for books about the artists that people love to listen to? I don't know if you have. I'm sure you must have some thoughts on this.
Oh, I
Why?
I
Yeah.
totally have thoughts on it. So, I've been blessed enough to be able to write the Kendrick Lamar book, to write the De La Soul book. I'm working on a Max Roach book. So I'm able to present the first ever books on these people. So I'm thankful. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, you just you have to call it what it is. And a lot of times when you're trying to write about certain artists, certain black artists, and just hip hop in general, there's this thinking that people won't buy it because, quite frankly, it's black music and it's hip hop music. I remember not too long ago, I was having dinner in New York somewhere, and this some random patron at the dinner was just like, "Oh, your first book was on Kendrick Lamar. Why did you decide to write your first book on a rapper?"
Right.
And I was just like, I was outdone because it was like, well, why? There's still a certain segment of the population that feels like hip hop is not viable music. Like, and the only thing I can point towards is the fact that maybe they just don't, certain listeners don't want to give it a chance. And they just, even though we're 50 years in, they still just don't want to give it a chance. And I think it's because by and large, it's because it's young black people expressing themselves in ways that they're not used to. And so I will say there are hip hop books in the marketplace, but it's difficult to get them greenlit because, quite frankly, there's just, certain editors will ask you to appeal to a broader audience. And what they want you to do is write whatever book you're working on for the metaphorical person at the airport buying a book on their way to, while they're buying neck pillows, maybe they hopefully will buy your book as well. And the thinking is that people will buy a Bruce Springsteen book and they'll buy a Bob Dylan book, they'll buy a Taylor Swift book because they are white artists, whereas they won't buy the quote unquote niche black book because there are black people on the cover. I mean, I hate to oversimplify it, but that's been the case. When you're trying to write a hip hop book, you have to jump through more hoops to get it written and to get it done and to get it supported properly. When you
Mm,
finally do it and it's time to get it marketed, the thinking is it's marketed to the same people. It's marketed to certain communities, but it's not marketed as a broad book like a Springsteen book would be marketed. It's siloed, whereas these bigger, quote unquote, wider books will get marketed to wider people, wider groups of people. And there's no getting around that until we actually change it and do something different. It's always going to be a problem for anybody trying to write a hip hop book.
yeah. I want to come back to the book later, but I want to take a quick related detour here, if you're willing to nerd out with me for a little bit, which is to talk more about the group's music. And so De La Soul has put out 8 studio albums in 2 days. They'll make it 9 studio albums with the forthcoming Cabin in the Sky, their first LP since Dave, aka Trugoy, passed away. And, again, we're not going to talk about that album today, but I'm curious to ask you, what would you, and I know this might be a tough one, what is your favorite De La Soul album? And is that different from what you think their best album is? So again, the discernment here is your personal favorite versus what you think is their best album. And maybe they're the same one, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
My personal favorite De La Soul album is Stakes is High. For similar reasons that you stated with 3 Feet High and Rising, where, and please pardon my memory if I got it wrong. You said you were in high school at the time?
I was, yeah.
Okay, so same thing with Stakes is High, where I remember, like, this was the summer of 1996, and I remember that summer being a crazy time for music coming out. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but I know that also, like, Jay-Z's Reasonable Doubt comes out that summer, and you have Nas's It Was Written comes out. And then I think maybe even a month after Stakes is High, you have A Tribe Called Quest Beats, Rhymes, and Life album that comes out. So
right.
I just have more like concrete, crystallized memory with Stakes is High, because I also remember the It's So Easy video. And I remember that it was set, I guess they were in high school. And it just kind of made it seem like, oh man, like they made high school look so fun. My high school wasn't like that at all. I had a good time in high school, but it wasn't like I cut the corner and there's Black Thought and Questlove and here's Pharoah Monch. And, it was nothing like that. But I would say Stakes is High is my favorite record.
Yeah.
Their best record. Oh man, I feel like top to bottom, I think it is the same answer, man. I don't know. I think I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'm gonna cheat if I can. Their best record, I feel like, is probably Stakes, because I feel like top to bottom, it had more consistency. As much as I dig De La, certain records, they would have like these incredible highs, but then certain aspects of the album don't really hold up as well, to me at least, just to me. I mean, obviously, feel free to disagree.
Yeah.
But certain records I can't play front to back, whereas Stakes is High, I feel like I could play front to back. But when I say I'm a cheat a little bit, now I didn't come to this until I got older. I feel like Balloon Mind State is even more consistent, because that was their first record that was efficient, because 3 Feet High and Rising was a long record, as was De La Soul is Dead. But then here comes Balloon Mind State. It's like a 40-minute thing, and it just kind of flows front to back, and it works perfectly.
Yeah.
So I feel like if you were to ask me, okay, my personal favorite is Stakes is High, but in terms of like artistic statement that holds up the best, probably Balloon Mind State to me. But also consider the source, because I'm a jazz guy. So the fact that they have Maceo Parker on it is kind of,
Yeah. As far as flexes go, I mean, it's not a bad one, right? I mean, for me, I think my favorite, and I do vacillate on this, and maybe depending on the day or the year, at least it might change, but I think De La Soul is Dead. Partly it is just the brazenness of reinventing themselves in such a explicit way. And also just the humor that is so weaves its way through there. In terms of best, though, I would probably have to go back to 3 Feet High and Rising, for all the reasons that we've already talked about, in terms of the influence that album established, in terms of what it created for folks. Though, to your point, Marcus, I would also always leave a door open for Balloon Mind State as kind of this, as you and I discussed, for the Los Angeles Review of Books conversation we had with Dave Heaton, who also wrote a book about De La. It's sort of this concept album where they never tell you what the concept is. You just kind of have to figure it out. But that's part of the puzzle box of it, is partly what makes it enjoyable. And I certainly do not want to like offend my political connects here, which would include you as well as Al Pete in the audience here. With Stakes, I loved it when it first dropped, but it's an album that for whatever reason hasn't really aged as well for me compared to some of their other LPs. And I think for me, it's because when I listen back to it now, it simultaneously feels a bit too long, like it could have been trimmed a bit. and it also just feels a bit too preachy. You know, which was kind of this was them, you know, basically planting, you know, I was going to say a stake in the ground. Okay, that's maybe a little on the nose, but I mean, it was a manifesto of sorts, right? This is them being deliberately critical around what they see around them, and I respect and appreciate them for it. But it's sort of, you know, with the passage of time, I'm not nearly as jazzed to like listen to that from a just a musical point of view, even though it is a exceptionally well produced album craft wise. Like I would never suggest otherwise, but I think as the fourth album in their order, it probably does fall right outside their top three just for me, for those reasons. But again, I do think it's a great album, and I can totally get why, especially if that was the album that dropped in your teen years. I could completely see why it would be something that people would gravitate to, because it is very clear about making a statement, right?
Yeah, and it's just very murky, you know. It just kind of reminds me of like an old Strata East record, or like you know, like an underground jazz kind of thing, which is it just feels like it's, I don't know, just like dirty in a way. I don't know. Because everything hip hop at that time was just so clean, and here they come with like the dark, murky record.
Yeah. All right, I want to come to back to their songs in a moment, but let's get back to sort of the De La Meta conversation here. And yeah, I think we talked about this in our last convo, but like, you know, De La, they represent such this fascinating career arc. And I think for a very long time, and maybe this goes back to the kind of conventional wisdom side of it, is I thought of them as a group that was constantly trying to reinvent themselves. But I think that was really more in the moment as you move from release to a release. At least now, when I look back upon, you know, the 35+ years that they've been making music for, with the benefit of the hindsight, I'm wondering if that perception of the group is constantly reinventing itself is perhaps maybe a little bit overstated, because even though there is a difference in style and sound from, let's say, the Grind Date compared to Balloon Mind State or what have you, as compared to Mosaic Thump, there is still this through line of De La just being De La that is consistent, I think, throughout everything that they have put out. So I got it's right. This is a poorly formed question, but to what extent do you think the group really did reinvent itself at each of these iterative stages in their recording career, at least? Or how much of it do you actually think these are just really facets of the same gem? But at the core, De La is, oh, there is a core to talk about that is consistent across, you know, these 4 decades that they've been recording.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, I feel like they weren't necessarily reinventing themselves after the golden era.
Mm,
You know, I feel like when I listen to 3 Feet High and Rising versus De La Soul is Dead versus Balloon Mind State and then Stakes is High, I feel like there was a real reinvention going on then, because I mean, obviously we all know the story, but I guess I'll repeat it, where like, you know, 3 Feet High and Rising comes out, the marketing, the touring, everything is just overwhelming. And then De La Soul is Dead refers to the fact that they were dead tired. So here they come with this sardonic album, and it's dark, and they're rallying against the marketing, they're rallying against the tour schedule, and they're just like, we're going to kill off the whole Daisy image. So I feel like that was a reinvention. And when I listened to Balloon Mind State, they were in their, I guess their their mid 20s. And they're already talking about family, and they're talking about legacy. They're talking about getting beyond this, you know? So I felt like they were growing up fast. And so that I felt like was like their adult record. And
mhm.
in Stakes is High, I felt, you know, normally the make or break record is the third album, but I felt like Stakes is High was like their make or break record, because like that was their first one without Prince Paul.
Right.
This is the one where, you know, obviously they had been around for a few years, and I guess to a certain extent the pressure was off. And so it's like, well, what are you going to do now? You know, and so here they come with, you know, and I think you're correct when you said it was a little preachy. Like it was very much like, we are upset. Like I think Al Pete just said in the chat, like, you know, they were upset,
Yeah.
and that's just what it was. I feel like they were trying to reinvent themselves with the AOI series, and I think that's when it kind of jumped the rails a little bit. Um, that's when you start getting into records that were, or songs that were, you know, it was a little, it starts to get a little choppy after a while. And I think at that point, that's when it was just like, okay, now they're being daylight. It's daylight being daylight, like you said. It's just them doing what they do. So you're gonna get the funny skits, you're gonna get the intricate rhyme patterns, you're gonna get the intricate sort of off-grid beats. Because I feel like, and I could be wrong in this, but I just kind of feel like to a certain extent, maybe if even if they didn't admit it, like they were running away from 3 Feet High and Rising, I felt like.
Mm.
Like meaning, I feel like I haven't had these conversations with them, obviously, but like when you think about 3 Feet High and Rising, and you think about all of the sort of drama that came with it, the sampling issues, their struggles with the marketing, and the fact that here they are as grown men in the 90s and they're still being held to a standard that they created as teenagers. They're totally different people. After a while, you just kind of felt like they were not necessarily falling back, but they were also just like, they were jaded, as we all get in the music industry, where it's just like, we're just kind of tired of all this BS and we just got to do what we want to do. And I think after Stakes is High comes out, that's when we get the daylight. It's just like, look, we're just gonna do completely what we want to do. Not that they weren't doing that before, but
Sure.
I feel like even now it was more so like, okay, there isn't as much heat on us, the light isn't as bright on us, and so here we are. We're gonna create the music we've always wanted to make, and
Yeah.
that's when the anonymous Nobody record comes, and the Grind date before that, etc.
Right.
So
Right.
um that's just my thinking, but I could be wrong in that. I feel like the reinvention stopped around the mid '90s.
Mhm. You know, in spending so much time researching this book, I'm assuming at some point there were things that you learned or just in the process of thinking about the group that maybe reshaped what you had previously thought about them, or at least updated them in particular ways. So, are there examples of ways, and again, by just doing the work to write High and Rising, that it had some kind of change in terms of your perception of the group, what they're about, their music, etc.
Man, when I was writing the book, I also was kind of going through my own transformative experiences, you know what I mean? Like similar, but also not on a big scale like De La, but similar in the sense that like, I was thinking about moving, I was going through some personal stuff. And I found that when I was researching the book, that's pretty much what they were doing. They were kind of going through it in that way. And what I learned, I guess I'll say all that to say is like, I learned that I'm not so different from them when I was writing it.
Mm.
I felt like De La Soul was a group that never really got to fully be themselves in a way, or like there was just so much combat that they had to deal with from the jump, from the marketing, from the sampling, from
Right.
people thinking they were soft and all of that. And so I guess what I was thinking when I wrote the book, that's why I wanted to write it as an act of love. It's just like, when I finally finished the book and Dave passed away, the thing that I just kept going back to was like, how do you grieve in public? Like how do you mourn your brother, but then also you move forward in the best way possible? Like how I can't imagine that. Like I was going through my own grief. So as I was finishing the book, my mom passes away. And so the thoughts are lining up where
Mm.
they're dealing with Dave's departure. I have to move forward while also planning my mom's memorial. So that was I don't know. I guess I'm more of an empathetic writer, and I always try to get to the heart of the art or the heart of the person as best as I can, as quickly as I can. And I felt that when I was writing about the group, it kind of made me feel like, at what point do do they finally get to be themselves? At what point can they put their guard down and just embrace all the love that they get? Because I feel like there's always like this guard up with them because they've been fighting against the industry for like 35 years. So with them, even though they're, I've heard that they're loving people, it just always feels like there's like a distrust there. Like, they're always going to have their guard up because they feel like anybody who comes along is just looking to take something from them. So I tried to write from an empathetic perch while also understanding that, they've gone through a lot. I was going through a lot at the time. And so I wanted to put as much of that heart and emotion in the text as I could.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. And oh wow, this time is flying by. I'm going to switch gears again and let's dip back into some musical nerdery. And this was a case where I did prep you ahead of time just because, this is like the lightning round questions.
Yeah.
Two of your favorite, and I invite the audience to put into the chat the answer to this. Two of your favorite De La Soul songs from any era and why those two?
I must say the ones that I keep coming back to, Rock Cocaine Flow.
Ah.
Because I remember when that came out, and I was just like, "Oh my God," when the beat starts stuttering, I was just like, "This is crazy." And then when you hear Doom on it, it's like, what? So I would say that's one.
Great
The other
call.
one is Sunshine. Sunshine. Yeah. As much as, again, it's been established. I'm a Stakes is High guy, but
yeah,
as much as I dig Stakes is High, the song, it's a tremendous song. When I get to Sunshine, that's the one that just kind of takes me out, where it's just like, oh, because you have that jazz sample on there. I can't remember the band. You have that sample on there and it just feels like you're floating away. So those are the two songs I would pick.
Great choices. It's kind of hard to go wrong with their catalog for certain, right?
It was tough. Yeah.
As we briefly touched on, De La Soul, when they came into the game, they basically invented, right, the modern hip hop skit. So one of your favorite De La skits?
Oh man, my favorite De La skit, I love the Ghost Weed skits. I thought those were cool because it hit me right at the time when I was very much like I was very much like a lyricist lounge cat. I was a backpacker. So I was all about Pharoah Monch. I was all about the Roots, and I was all about Tribe Called Quest. And so I can't remember the CD package, but I don't know if they even said like Pharoah Monch is in it. I could be wrong on that, but like anyway, I remember certain points on the first point on the AOI album, the first one, Mosaic Thump, and when they do the whole Ghost Weed thing, and then the lyricist ends up being Pharoah Monch, I went crazy because I was such a Pharoah Monch fan, still a Pharoah Monch fan.
Yeah, shout out to Organized.
Shout out. And then and then later in the album when they do it again and the voice shifts and it's Black Thought, it was like, oh, I thought that was crazy. Like, so I would say that's my favorite skit of De La's, I believe. That's the one I go back to the most.
Yeah. I'm just going to plug right here for Biddies in the BK Lounge, which is simultaneously one of my favorite skits and just favorite songs because it's really a little bit of both. And this is off of, De La Soul is Dead. And just the peak level of not just their sense of humor, but like, how do you actually meld that into, this multi-part skit / song? I just think Biddies is like such a brilliant construction on every level in that respect. Especially when De La came into the game and really first, through those first at least 4 albums, this was still an era in which the recording industry was still willing to fund B-sides and remixes, and De La has, an embarrassment of riches in that respect. So do you have any favorite B-sides or remixes by the group?
My favorite B-side, just meaning like just a joint on the album that like no one really talks about, kind of.
Actually, it would be a song on one of their singles that was not on an LP, right?
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So Get Away. Get Away was a good one. God, I can't remember the name of the song. They had it was the Live at SOB's album.
Mm.
Live at SOB's album. They had this intro. God, and I think they just put it out on vinyl like last year. But I remember hearing that and being like, "Oh man," because it ends with them like making fun of somebody in the crowd. Somebody help me out with that because y'all know what I'm talking about. It was those two. It was over this like really like stumbling, murky, lo-fi beat, and I want to say it was the first song on it. I think it was called Mission Possible. I think that was the name of the
Mm.
record.
Mm.
God, yeah, my memory is not helping me out right now.
Same.
But all of a sudden, also, it's not a B-side, but I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I want to shout out the you remember that the Run project they came out with that was on the iPod?
Oh God, vaguely.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
RUN project.
Yeah, that's a while back.
That was a while, yeah, which just kind of showed up on everybody's Apple. That's a dope project too that I hope they do something with if they haven't already.
Last question on this level, which is what song would you play for someone who's never heard of any De La Soul music? What would you choose to be an introduction to them?
Oh yeah, so I would play Change and Speak. I would play that one because I felt like I sort of vacillated a little bit with this one because I was like, well, is it the easy answer? Is it Me, Myself, and I, or is it Plug Tune In? But I was like, Change and Speak. I feel like because I grew up in a family that was really into like funk music. They were really into like 70s soul in a big way. So when the beat kicks in, it just reminds me of the stuff that we would play on Saturdays or Saturday nights when it was like everybody was just over and we were just playing music. I feel like I chose that one because it's the easiest sort of introduction. It's the easiest to get into. And then I also feel like the lyrics they're literally talking about their vocabulary. They're like, we're different. Here we are. You may not understand, you may not get all the inside jokes, but you're still going to stick around for what we're doing. And I appreciate that song because there's something to be said about just doing what you want to do and letting people catch up. It's the way I try to govern myself, and it's a way I feel like more people ought to govern themselves, where it's just like, just do the thing that you want to do and let folks catch up with you because if it's done well, folks will catch up. And I feel like Change and Speak says all of that in like 3 minutes.
Yeah, no, great call. Great call. Um, Last question before we throw things open for the audience to ask theirs, which is that, part of the reason why we want to pick up books about the artists that we love and respect is because we're hoping to learn something new about them in the process. And certainly, I think the amount of research that you put into High and Rising is you are uncovering all kinds of behind the scene details across the course of the career. What are some of the things especially for those listening who have not had a chance to pick up the book yet? What's something that a lot of De La fans probably didn't know that they will find out by reading your book? And this could be something that you had no idea about that you only found out because you wrote the book.
Charlie Rock, Charlie Rock, the forgotten,
fifth Beatle.
the fifth Beatle, the fourth member of De La Soul, who,
Yeah.
according to him, got kicked out early. That was a revelation. Like the fact that there was this other guy who actually, according to him, he and Dave were the ones that were like, making the beats. They were the ones that were finding the samples. So I feel like Charlie Rock was a revelation. He's in chapter 1. He was the guy who was saying like, like, look, he has no problem with De La, but he definitely had a problem with the way he was like sort of excommunicated for the marketing that would be 3 Feet High and Rising. So I feel like you can't say the name De La Soul and not say the name Charlie Rock. And I feel like anybody trying to do that they're doing Charlie and they're doing the group a disservice. My thing is always, if you're going to tell the story, you got to tell the whole story. You can't just leave out parts of it. You can't leave out the ugly parts because it doesn't fit a certain narrative. And I feel like Charlie, you know, bless Charlie, because he gave me a lot of time and he was very honest, but he also made it clear. He was like, look, I have no beef with these guys. I was in the front row at the shows, but me as a writer and me as a storyteller, I'm like, you have to celebrate Charlie like you celebrate these other guys, because
Yeah.
he was a part of the narrative.
Yeah. I mean, that was a huge revelation for me because, yeah, I had not really realized, that part of their story. And, he's given both to you, but to other folks I was reading after reading, this part about him in your book, I realized that, longtime acquaintance of mine who runs uncut.com also did an interview with him and kind of repeating some of the same stories. And again, if they're even half of those things are true, he played a major role in how that group basically got started conceptually, some of the samples that were used in some of the early songs. And so the fact that like he is not more bitter about it is really like remarkable, because I could imagine a lot of other people would be salty, as heck at basically being written out of this entire story in terms of the narrative, the popular narrative that we know about it. Though, again, your book puts Charlie Rock back into the story. Dave's book does the same thing. So I do think that's one of the great things about having these kinds of books out there is they help give us a more complex and complicated portrait than we might get otherwise. And so it's the big benefit. All right. We are down to like 9 minutes here. So if folks have questions that you would like to ask Marcus and or I, throw them in the comments here. And as we wait for those comments to pop up, I want to go back to sort of the questions about certain songs. Sleeper jam. In other words, a De La Soul cut that you feel like doesn't get as much attention or mention that you really feel like it should. And then meanwhile, let's see what questions come in as you answer this.
I feel like, on the AOI Bionics album, there was a song on there called Held Down, and it was Paz and CeeLo. I always thought that was a gorgeous song. That is a stunt. I mean, obviously, when people think about that record, they're when they're talking B-sides, they're gonna go to Trying People, as they should, because Dave, that was his manifesto. It was an incredible song. But I feel like the song Held Down with CeeLo is a song that more people need to go to, because it has a full choir on it. Paz is talking about getting older. He's talking about explaining religion to his daughter. It's a gorgeous song, and it has great storytelling. And I feel like it was the most straightforward I had heard Paz since like I Am I Be, where he's just saying directly what the thing is, because he's such a gifted lyricist that sometimes his message can get lost in the way that he rhymes. But on Held Down, I felt like that was the one where he was just saying it plainly and it was easier to get, but it was still complex and it was still quite intricate. And then CeeLo sounded amazing on it. So I want to say it's track 6 on AOI Bionics, the song Held Down.
And meanwhile, you got a question here in the chat from LL Cool H05. Where do you recommend we purchase your books, in person or online?
Oh, I would say make it easy. Make it easy. Just get it online, but also support independent bookshops. So go to bookshop.org and order it from your local bookstore. Don't, if you can stand it, don't go through Amazon, but do whatever's convenient. But I would strongly recommend just going bookshop.org, ordering it there, and then having it shipped to your place, or just going and picking it up from an indie bookshop.
All right, what else do folks want to know here? And meanwhile, as we wait, it's funny because I was thinking about what would be my kind of sleeper cut, and it is also not from the same AOI album. I think mine came out on Mosaic Thump, which is Declaration, which is a Posthumous solo cut, and just really just like one of the best songs that he ever put out in any era. And I don't necessarily, I mean, if I'm being really blunt here, and you started talking about some of the differences in the group by that point is they've admitted this, so it's not like I don't think we're putting something on them, but they wanted to make like party jams, and they didn't want to put out another like more kind of preachy, socially engaged album the way that, let's say, that Stakes or some of their earlier stuff was, but them aiming for the radio and trying to like come up with radio hits, and Declaration is not that, but I do think a lot of the other songs off of the AOI albums were more commercially aimed that way, and a lot of them just didn't really work, especially for that era of what we were listening to hip hop wise. Like, you think back now, and I know this is like revisionist, but imagine if they had worked with Timbaland, because Timbaland was doing all this wild stuff for people like Missy and Magoo and Busta. There's a simpatico eccentricity and creativity there. And imagine pairing that musical energy with what De La could have done. And to me, that just seems like, in hindsight at least, such an obvious pairing that if you were
Yeah.
going to like, yeah, think about how to reshape De La sound. Like, yeah, get Tim on the phone for that, right? And for all we know, maybe they tried and didn't. Meanwhile, sorry. So we have one question is, let's see, when you're writing, are you listening to the subject's record? So that's a great question. So were you listening to De La actively while you were writing the book?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. That's all I was playing. Well, I take that back. It's not all I was playing. It was most of what I was playing, because I was still operating as a journalist here and there. So I was still profiling, jazz artists. I was still doing the column at the Times and things like that. But when it was time to walk around and like really dive into music, oh yeah, no, it was all daylight all the time. Now the thing about that is I can listen to it a bunch and get it in my head, but then when it's time to write, I can't
Right.
listen to music, because then
Yeah.
that's a tough one to do.
Yeah. See, I thought maybe that was what the question was asking, because I like listening to music when I write, but only if it's instrumental. If it's got lyrics, then I get cognitive dissonance going. So I have a couple of playlists. One's like just all like 70s soul jazz, and another one is hip hop instrumental beats, which is like basically like 80% Dilla, bunch of J. Rawls stuff in there as well. As long as it doesn't have lyrics, I like to have something playing. But again, it can't have words, otherwise it interferes with my thinking and my writing process at this point. So
That's right.
we have another question here from LL Cool H05. Did the native tongues have a mission statement, intend to be a movement, or were they more mainly friends and fellow artists in the same place and time? That's a great question.
I love that question. I
Yeah.
love that question. So, and I'll keep it quick because I know we're coming up on time. I had built it up in my head that there was this grand meeting of the minds, that like, they all met each other and they sat down around a big table and they were like, we're gonna be the native tongues. And what I found in talking to the Jungle Brothers for the book was like, no, they bumped into De La at a show, I think in Boston. And they just were like, oh, you guys look cool. Yeah, okay, let's just hang out. That was it. That's the story of the native tongue. So there was no statement. They all love the same kind of music. They love making the same kind of music. And so they decided to just do it together as much as they could.
Yeah. In certain ways, and again, I don't, I'm not trying to get into revisionist history here, but like, imagine if they really had been much more intentional. Like maybe there would have been a Native Tongues album or something along those
Oh,
lines,
yeah.
And if there was, just more intentionality about how they work together. I mean, what we got were, a handful of songs that were fantastic. I mean, the Buddy remix is like one of my favorite De La associated songs of all time. And, Queen Latifah had Mama Gave Birth to the Soul Children. And, they found ways to collaborate with each other. But I just feel like there was just this missed opportunity to just put out like a straight up Native Tongues album. And it would have been these groups really at the kind of the height of their, their relevance and their creative artistry and all these things. Again, I'm not complaining about what we did get, because there's still some great things that came out of that. But to your point, right, it wasn't like some master plan where they, met at the Audubon Ballroom and decided to like put together like a whole game plan for the native tongue movement and whatnot.
That's right. That's right.
All right, we are at time. I want to thank the Los Angeles Public Library for hosting this. I want to thank the few dozen people who came and sat in our little virtual conversation. And obviously, I want to thank Marcus for his time and his thoughts and his insights, and his book, High and Rising, available through your favorite local bookstore now.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
I want to thank you both so much, Marcus, Oliver, everyone who showed up. Really appreciate it. Stay in touch with the LA Public Library. Please, any last words from you, Marcus, before we take off?
No, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate everybody. And yeah, just I'm easy to find. So if you have any questions, just hit me up and I'll answer them.
Beautiful. High and Rising, check out the book. Max Roach book to look forward to. That's incredible. Great news. So thank you all so much. Have a great night.